Well, Coach, why don't you start by talking a little bit about the two captains that were selected on your side of the ball, Diego Fago and Kevin Brennan?
Yeah, I couldn't be more excited about those 2 guys. I mean, it was unanimous, amongst the coaches and our players, who those guys are gonna be, but, um, really, really great leaders, both of them. Anytime your captains are your hardest workers, um, then I think you got a pretty good chance, and I've seen both those guys grow and develop, in my time here. Diego's always been one of those guys in a leadership role, but I think the way he started to lead has changed a little bit. I think he's really blossomed in that role. And then, Kevin Brennan is a guy that doesn't say a whole lot, more of a lead by example and do what I do. But he's starting to become a more vocal guy too, and kind of growing into that role. But couldn't be more pleased really with those 2 captains. And I think we got 2 really good offensive ones too. And so really excited about that group of captains and what that means for our football program moving forward.
As far as personnel, let's start up front. You mentioned when we last spoke to you about DeAndre Williams shifting over to D tackle,
Mhm.
and Busick and Musin fighting at end. Do you feel at this point you're going to keep DeAndre over at tackle with Jarius and roll with these two young guys?
Yeah, I didn't know how that would play out during spring ball, but we wanted to take a look at that, and I think it was definitely the right move. I think there's always 4 or 5 guys that really kind of surprise you coming out of spring ball. Maybe not surprises, but guys that you're really excited about, that you were hoping would be who you thought they were, kind of guys. And Jacob Busick has been one of those biggest surprises coming out of spring. I mean, he's a big, athletic guy. Who we needed to replace Perkins. And so I've been really, really pleased with him. Max Muson's had a really solid spring too. So I think we got a good solid 2 deep right there at that position. And then with DeAndre and Jarius at tackle, those are 2 guys that both played a lot of snaps for us. I think DeAndre had a really good spring. And so those guys kind of battling it out there for that spot. And both those guys are going to play. Obviously, a D line, you can't play every snap. And so to have 4 solid guys at those 2 spots, we feel really good about.
Another position that was interesting to me is the will linebacker spot. Tama Tuatelli is kind of well, I mean, he's been a starter 2 seasons, but never went the distance because of injuries. But Johnny Hodges apparently made a move on him and is now equal atop the depth chart. What can you say about what's going on there?
Yeah, well, we're really excited about the way Johnny finished out the season, especially the way he played in that Army game. And so we're really excited about him going into spring. He was limited a little bit because of a hamstring deal, but he's going to be just fine. But he's a big physical kid that can run. His football knowledge of what we're doing has obviously expanded. So really excited about him. Excited to get Tomo back as well. And so you're looking at Will Harbor's another guy that had a tremendous spring, young guy, freshman. Really excited about him. Have more good depth at linebacker right now than we have since I've been here, and a lot of experience coming back there. So super fired up about the inside linebacker position.
So to clarify, did Tuatelli not participate in spring camp?
Um, Not fully, no.
Limited.
Yeah,
Right. So that Hodges got a lot of reps, is what you're saying.
correct. Both those guys are limited, but feel really good about both of them.
You're muted, Wentz.
Yeah, I try to click off and it doesn't work sometimes. Biscuit was a guy that had to learn on the fly last year, and you talked about Coach Hall getting him ready in a short order. But
Yep.
I'm wondering what you think of his ability now that he's had a whole spring to really settle in and learn the defense. Is he everything you thought he was? Is he even better, or what's your thoughts on Biscuit?
Super impressed with him coming out of spring ball. He put on 15 pounds. He's carrying it really well, moving well. He's got a lot of confidence now. He knows the defense. His comfort level has increased dramatically. He's a guy that can stem around and do some things and knows where he needs to be when the ball's snapped. Everything's gotten better with him. He loves football, plays extremely hard. He's moving better. Like I said, he's heavier, technically gotten better. He's been one of our most improved guys throughout the spring, and it was a guy that we were obviously excited about as we finished the season as well. But he's changed his body, and it's paying off for him. So really fired up about Biscuit.
And on a similar note, another guy that had to learn on the fly last year and still impressed, and I'm thinking saw an entire spring camp might have helped John Marshall at striker. And I'm wondering, did you want him to gain weight, or did you? I mean, what about Marshall at striker? I would guess
Yes, I'd
he's the
say,
player you thought he was, right?
yeah, I'd say very similar things about him that I just said about Biscuit. A guy that really solidified his spot during spring ball. Things that we talk about improving on. He certainly has done that. He's a guy that's in great shape. He can run all day. He's put on some weight. Um, he's just the amount of snaps he got during spring football helped him tremendously. We're playing him at some different positions, so he'll have some flexibility going into fall, and so really excited about him as well.
And last for me, the secondary, there's a lot of experience back there with Kevin and Mitch West. And I think Coach Nehemiah said on his presser the other day that, you were very pleased with West's spring. And obviously, we know what Kevin can do. We know what Michael McMorris can do. And then there's both Jamal Glenn and Caleb Clear got valuable experience. They both started at games last season. That secondary, you must feel pretty good about that entire unit.
I do. A lot of really good experience coming back. A lot of guys in that group that I trust coming back, which is obviously very important with those position groups. I think Mitch West is a guy that he may be one of our most improved players and played well toward the end of the season, but's had a really good off season, had a great spring, I thought. So super excited about him and where he's at and just his development, uh, understanding, knowing the defense, playing with more confidence now. He's a guy that you can move around back there a little bit too. And obviously Kevin's really solid. Excited to have Mikey back. Obviously, I think you guys know how I feel about Mikey. I think he's one of the better corners in our conference. So I think he's going to have a breakout year this year. I really do. And then Jamal Glenn, uh, we were really excited about the way he played toward the end of the year last year and kind of took over that spot. We made that position move there. And so a lot of really good experience coming back in the back end. It's like that across the board, really. You look at all these different position groups, a lot of experience coming back, a little bit more depth than we've had, good solid depth that we've had since I've been here. And so that's definitely something I'm fired up about. And we've got a good group with the two captains that we've got. I love the way our unit works together. And we got a bunch of unselfish guys um, that care more about winning and playing for each other than they do playing for themselves. And I think it's a special group. I really do. Love the way that we work. All the intangible things that you look for in a group, we've got those things, and that excites me more than anything. And you combine that with what we've got coming back, um, I think we got a chance to be pretty good. Now we're not, I'm not stamping it us by any means. Okay, we've got a long way to go. So don't get me wrong on that build. I just think, comparatively speaking, from 19 and 20, where we're at right now, I think we got a chance to be as good as we've been here for sure. And we got to continue to work and develop and get better over the course of the summer, um, and in the fall camp, obviously. But I couldn't be more excited about where we're at right now.
For those who watch this video later, Biscuit is Donald Berniard Jr., rising sophomore nose guard from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Let's go to Kareem Copeland.
Hey, Brian. I know you just kind of touched on a bunch of guys. I was going to ask you about, some of the guys that maybe surprised you or broke out. I don't know if those guys fell into the category that you just kind of mentioned a minute ago, but anybody that fits into that category that maybe you haven't mentioned already?
Yeah, I hate answering that question because inevitably I always leave somebody out that I should have probably mentioned, but I'll do my best. I know I'm going to look at my depth chart here too, but Clay Cromwell is a guy, a freshman that has put on almost 50 pounds since he's been here. Who's 293 pounds. We played him at nose toward the end of spring. Coming out of spring as the number 2 nose, and he was super impressive. He's a big, physical, athletic kid. Is learning how to play the position. I think his upside is tremendous. Once he learns it and gets comfortable with what we're doing, I think he's got a chance to be a really, really good player here. So super fired up about him. He was one of those guys that was kind of a little bit of a surprise during spring ball. I knew he had some physical tools, but didn't know he had some of the intangible type things that he does. Plays extremely hard, really, really just brute strong in there. And so once he gets polished up, I know Coach Hall is going to do a great job with him to where he's playing a great pad level, using his hands, knowing what to do. I mean, he's going to be a big time force in there. And he's a kid that can play nose or tackle for us. He's athletic enough at 290 pounds to go play 3 technique. So really excited about him. I mentioned Will Harbor earlier, Kareem. I thought he had a tremendous spring. You know, he got voted our most improved player. He wasn't able to do anything in the fall, really. Had some health issues and that kind of deal, but he's healthy now and super smart. Has learned the defense as quickly as any linebacker that has learned that spot since I've been here. So he was a real bright spot coming out of spring ball for us. At safety, I think Colin O'Connor is a young guy that was on the scout team last year that really athletic. You know, his numbers kind of showed up really quickly in the catapult stuff, just how well he runs, really smooth back there. He's 195, 200-pound safety, really smart. You know, I think he's a guy that we can move around a little bit back there and provide some depth. So I was really pleased with his progress during spring ball. Nicholas Straw obviously started at Raider for us last year, so I wouldn't say it's a surprise, but he's really solidified his role there and really has worked his tail off and gotten better. So I'm really excited about Nick. Young corner, Dre Grace was a guy that stood out during spring ball. He's a taller, longer corner. I talked about potentially moving him to safety. But had a really good spring at corner. So I think we're going to leave him there. But he's a little bit longer body type than, say, a Mikey or a Jamal, a guy that playing the boundary for us, but showed us a lot during spring ball. He's a competitor. He's physical, smart, understands the defense early on. So excited about him as well. And like I said, there's several guys that did some good things during spring ball. I thought at Raider, going back to that, John Kelly had a really good spring. I was really impressed with him. Max Sandlin at Raider as well is a super athletic guy that got a little bit banged up during spring, so didn't get all the reps that he needed to get, but excited about him and his future here as well.
And a more in general question that both Ken and I have been talked about the last couple of days, said the group as a whole is really taking a little bit more ownership, just kind of coming off of last year, you know, everybody just not wanting, you know, everybody almost trying to get that bad taste out of their mouth. I was just curious, have you noticed that amongst your group also of, you know, not to say, you know, guys didn't push it in the past, but, you know, after everything that went on last year, it being kind of like, hey, let's make sure that doesn't happen again, especially now that we're able to kind of have our normal spring and normal practices and all that kind of stuff.
That's a good question. Yeah, absolutely. And start with our leaders on defense. You know, our 2 captains. You know, they're like us as coaches. They got a really bad taste in their mouth, you know, from last year, and so certainly don't want that to happen again. So, you know, we know what the issues were and the problems last year, and we're making sure that those things don't happen again. Obviously, getting to go through spring ball and have a physical spring ball where we win against each other a ton has helped tremendously. You don't realize how valuable spring football is until you lose it for a year, and especially here at the Naval Academy. And so, but yeah, I think these guys are fired up. They're ready to get that taste out of their mouth. You know, they've got a chip on their shoulder, and they practice and like they've got something to prove for sure. And they're humble, but they're hungry, and they know last year was not who we are. So I'm excited about that.
Cool. Thank you. That's all I got.
Thanks, Kareem.
Coach, in the chat, Wags asked about the nose guard depth chart. I think we released CO's 2 and Cromwell's as 3.
Good.
Is Cromwell 2 or?
Yeah, I think those guys are kind of side by side.
Okay.
At this point. Yeah.
There you go, Wags. Scott Wyckoff.
Coach, I know you talked about Kevin's leadership. What is it about him that makes him such a special player? When we broadcast the games, I mean, he's always there. No matter where the ball is, he seems to find his way there.
Yeah, a lot of things. I think number one, he plays extremely hard. He's one of the smartest players I've been around. He knows what everybody else is supposed to be doing. You know, when we watch film, the one benefit of being in my room is, you know, I want the safeties to have a big picture view of things that we're doing on defense, so they start to understand why I'm calling certain things. So I'll ask, you know, bonus questions in our meeting. You know, what went wrong on this particular play, and if the defensive tackle's in the wrong gap, Kevin's a guy that can point something like that out, and not a lot of guys in the back end can do that. So he's extremely smart. He prepares as well as any player I've been around as far as film study, knowing the opponent. And I think that allows him to anticipate some things and allows him to play a little faster. But his football IQ is off the charts. His work ethic and his preparation is right there with that. And so he's a special kid. He's got all the intangibles, and then you combine that with the physical skill set that he has, it makes him a really good player.
You mentioned a little bit about it earlier. What does it mean to you to be calling plays and to be putting guys in on defense when you have the depth like you have going into the fall? We've talked a lot over the last couple of seasons about some standouts at different positions, but then maybe if they get a little injury or something like that, it's an issue. It seems like the depth really, you're 2 and maybe 3 deep sometimes at these positions this year.
Yeah, it certainly helps. You know, last year you were one play away from it being really, really scary. You know, having to move guys around to different positions that they hadn't played and those kind of things. And so you feel a lot better going into the season this year. Obviously, because we've got some of those 2 second and third spots more solidified. It was tough last year too, Scott, because we didn't have time to evaluate a bunch of guys we really didn't know. And we were evaluating guys during the course of the season, in the course of football games, as opposed to getting them evaluated during spring ball or fall camp. And so it certainly settles my nerves a little bit going into the season. But I mean, we're like a lot of people. You know, it's as you go through the season, the guys get worn down. You need to be able to play more guys, especially up front and at linebacker. Those guys, it's hard to play every snap nowadays. And so you've got to have good quality depth in order to be successful at this level and in order to continue to get good as the season goes by.
And finally, what can your players on defense do between now and between summer camp to continue the growth that you saw in the spring?
Well, you know, obviously they're transitioning into working with our strength conditioning staff. They're lifting weights, they're running, they're doing their own film study. They'll come in and we'll get a chance to spend some time with them as well. But just continue to do the same things that they've been doing. And now we've got a chance to put some consistent off-season work in. It's been tough over the last year with our kids getting quarantined and things like that. You'd go, you know, 4 weeks and you'd put in quarantine for 2 weeks. And so you'd lose a lot of what you gained. And so now we've got hopefully, you know, a long, consistent stretch where those guys can get in the weight room, and guys that need to gain weight can do that and get stronger and all those kind of things. And so excited about that as things are starting to get back to somewhat normal around here.
Thanks. Have a great summer.
You too, Scott. Thanks.
Phil Bergman.
Coach, is there a story behind Donald's nickname of Biscuit?
Yeah, there is, and I can't remember it, to be perfectly honest with you. You know, I felt kind of funny calling him Biscuit at first. I didn't know if that was an insult or something, you know, or a chubby joke, but he's not chubby. So, but there's a story there, and I'm sorry, Phil, I can't remember it, but he likes and prefers to be called Biscuit. So it's definitely not an insult to call him that.
Good to know. The other question.
I'll get back to you on that, Phil.
Sounds good. The other question, you talked about potentially switching guys from corner to safety. What are traits you look for in a corner that work well at safety?
Well, they have to be smart, obviously, and playing safety is a little different. You're back there in a different kind of space, and obviously, you'd like those guys to have a little bit more size and length. You know, Mikey physically can go play any spot in the back end. I mean, athletically could go play any place in the back end, but he would take a beating, you know, at his size and what we ask those safeties to do in the run game and things like that. I don't know if his body would last because he plays so hard and throws his body around. But as you get up to 190-pound plus guy, then that gives them some position flexibility to potentially play that safety spot. So a little bit bigger, longer corner, preferably. Our boundary corner is a guy that's not too far off size-wise than what we want to recruit at safety, if that makes sense.
Perfect. Thank you.
Wags.
Hey, Coach, another guy, a freshman that showed up on the depth chart at corner, Dre Grace. Anything you can tell us about him?
Yeah, he's one of those guys that I mentioned earlier, Bill. Just pleasant surprise coming out of camp. Knew that he had some tools in the fall. Watching him run around, and he was on the scout team. He'd come down and run routes for us, but a really coachable kid. Works extremely hard. You tell him he's what we call a one-timer. You tell him to do something one time, he does it. Doesn't take 2 or 3 times of coaching something to get him to do something, whether it's technical or fundamental. And so he's improved dramatically since he's been here. Plays really hard. He's one of those guys that has some things that you can't coach as far as his football IQ and instincts. Either guys have those or they don't. He certainly has that, which you need to play in the secondary. He's got some confidence about him. He's a competitor. And he's a guy that needs all the weight room work he can get. He's got to continue to develop his body as well. And as he does that, he's going to get better and better.
And you talked about the depth at linebacker, but I'm looking at a guy like Terrell Adams, who started some games last year, and he's 3rd on the depth chart. I think, by the way, Chasen Buckner lists him on the depth chart as 197 pounds. He's got to be more than that, right?
Yeah, he's more like 220.
Okay.
Those rates are from last year, Wags. We haven't updated him yet.
No problem. But then like Cuevas, Gillis, and McDonald, those guys are good athletes at striker. How are you going to get all these guys on the field and utilize them?
Yeah, it's a good question to have to ask. Xavier was limited during spring ball, so I'm really excited about him. He's got a really nice physical skill set at striker. Johnny had a good spring. He's a guy one of those guys I left off and didn't mention earlier, but excited about him. We may be making a move to safety for him. He's a 6-foot+ kid that's long and rangy, has the skill set to play high safety, and it will help us with our depth back there. And we've got some good young guys coming in, that I think kind of fall into that striker role. We're going to play Johnny Hodges out there in certain personnel groupings. Play a little bit bigger body out there. Some of the things that we're looking at doing. So, but no, that's a good problem. If it's a good problem to have, you look at Terrell, like you mentioned, being the 3rd guy on the depth chart. He had a good spring, and so that just goes to show you, the good quality depth and that we have at that position.
Well, you had talked, I think, on a previous presser about experimenting with like a second high safety or something like that. Is that maybe where you could get some of those guys sometime?
Yeah, certain personnel groupings. We're looking at doing some different things. I hate to give up too much of that information before we go into our first game, but we're always trying to look to tweak things and get better at what we're doing and try to kind of customize what we're doing to our personnel and what fits us best and how we can put guys in position to be successful. When you take into consideration what we have to defend and see every week. So yeah, we're looking at, obviously we tweak things, change things a little bit every year and every off season. So I had to experiment a little bit this spring and did some things that I like. It's difficult here to experiment a whole lot because you're going against the option every day in practice. And so you can't do some of the things you'd like to do, or at least get a good look at some of those things. But yes, that could be a possibility for sure.
And last for me, something Coach Niemann mentioned yesterday was kind of a really insightful. He said that obviously a big part of what you like to do defensively is disguising and, showing pressure one place, bringing it from somewhere else. But it's harder to do that when your guys don't really, if they're at all confused themselves. But he said that when guys are experienced to understand the defense, it's easier to do the disguising because they're like, okay, I'm showing from here, but I'm actually going to end up over there. I got this. Can you talk about that? Do you think you made a lot of progress in that regard?
I do. Obviously, some of that stuff is structured and called, and then some of it is, giving guys flexibility to do some things on their own. When you talk about a guy like Kevin Brennan, He knows, all right, what the quarterback's looking at pre-snap, what to show from time to time. You know, if we're doing something in particular, he knows maybe to show like we're doing the opposite of that. And so you've got a part of it that's structured that our guys understand, and we try to disguise. And there's some things that you can some more leeway and responsibility you can give guys to kind of freelance is probably the wrong word, but to give them some freedom on how they line up. When you know and you trust those guys and they understand why we're doing what we're doing. If that makes sense, Bill.
Kareem Copeland.
Bill kind of snuck in and slid into a little bit of my question right there. I was going to talk about that same thing. You know, Ken and Ivan were talking about getting such good looks from the defense. Said, you know, during spring they get as many looks and as they might see from your defense as they might see from other teams during an entire season. I'm curious, you know, that's a great look for the offense, but at the same time, I imagine it's got to be a lot of teaching and a lot of trust to be able to install so much for guys. And I'm just curious, how do you strike that balance in a spring session of being able to do so much, but not overload guys? Because it just seems like, you know, a lot goes into that defense that guys got to learn pretty quickly.
Sure. That's a really, really good question. And I think that my first spring here, it was the same thing. We gave them a lot of different fronts, a lot of different looks, a lot of pressure and movement. And I think that was one thing that really helped Malcolm Perry to develop into the quarterback that he was, because what he saw in practice was a lot easier than what he saw in games. And so I think that's been good for our quarterbacks. And the reason that we do it is because you go against the option every day, and we have an option defense. We have a package that we have when we go play Army or we play Air Force. And when we go against our offense, we certainly do those things, but we also want to do some of our base things as well. And so the challenge for me is, all right, how much of this can we do versus our offense and be somewhat sound? So we'll do some things against our offense that we might not do against the Army or an Air Force, if that makes sense, because we need to get things done and repped, full speed, good on good, live. And so we have to bastardize some things going against our offense, but we also need to get some things done that we wouldn't typically do maybe versus the triple. And sometimes you find some things that, hey, this actually looks pretty good. I wouldn't have thought to do it against Army or Air Force, but it looked pretty good against our offense. Maybe we can carry some of this stuff over, you know. So we try to incorporate as much of our base stuff, as much of our, you know, our philosophy on defense of stemming and moving and being disruptive and chaotic and disguising. We try to do as much of that as we can during spring against our offense. And like I said, you know, some of the things you have to tweak and change because it's a different offense, obviously, but we try to get as much of that done as we can, which is a challenge. It always is. And it was I was at Kennesaw State before I got here. It was the same kind of challenges that we had, but you know, there's pros and cons to going against the option in spring ball. And that, you know, one of the pros obviously is, you know, the offensive line's going to come off the football. It's going to be a physical spring. You have to learn how to take on blocks, get off blocks. You're going to have to be extremely disciplined with your eyes and your responsibility. And so those are pros and make us better, make us a more disciplined unit. Then the cons being, you know, you don't get to experiment maybe as much as you want or do everything that you want to do in spring. So there's good and there's bad.
Sometimes you have to slow that down for guys because it's so much. I mean, each year is a different group of guys, but do you see certain, not necessarily this year, but in certain times that you're like, okay, this is a little bit much for maybe it's a young group or for whatever, and like, okay, we got to slow this down and just, you know, before you put too much on them at times?
Sure. Certainly my first spring here, we had to slow it down quite a bit, you know, because it was a new defense. And when you get the experience we have coming back, you can be somewhat aggressive with your installation and some changes with your first and your second group maybe, but maybe pull back, you know, with the younger guys a little bit until they understand it. So yeah, I mean, that's always the challenge, you know, knowing where that sweet spot is, Kareem, how much you can get in. And you want to get some things on film and you want to experiment a little bit and see what you like, what you don't like, and maybe you want to move some guys around and try them at different positions. I think the one thing that's really good for especially guys in the back end or even the linebackers, for the Mike to go play Will to go play Mike, it helps them understand their position a little bit better. It's the same thing in the back end. If I can get a guy to go play free safety and bandit and striker, they just get a much better grasp of the defense and what's going on around them. So those are some of the things you try to get done in spring.